And maybe one last thing I want to point out, because obviously we're talking to Democrats, but the stakes that are involved right now actually impact Republicans as well.
Yeah.
The Democratic National Committee is organizing hundreds of Fight the Trump Takeover protests in 43 states to condemn Trump-backed redistricting.
Señores, está de regreso. El expresidente Barack Obama rompió el silencio y para sorpresa de todos lanzó un discurso demoledor en contra de Donald Trump, acusándolo directamente de atacar los derechos de voto en Estados Unidos. Obama habló frente a un grupo de legisladores demócratas del estado de Texas y recordó, como en otro tiempo, que el país era la envidia del mundo cuando se trataba de democracia y participación electoral. Pues obviamente en aquel entonces eran los regímenes autoritarios los que manipulaban elecciones, los dictadores los que amañaban resultados. Y mientras tanto, pues Estados Unidos se estaba mostrando como un ejemplo brillante de cómo tenía que funcionar un sistema democrático. Hasta que, bueno, llegó Trump y lo destruyó. Pues bueno, vamos a escuchar lo que dijo Obama al empezar este discurso.
You got countries all around the world where the elections are fixed, and whoever's in charge suppresses and makes it hard for the opposition to compete. And we used to be a shining example to those countries, and people would aspire to the kind of true democracy that America had. And we need to get back to that, because that's not just a Democratic or a Republican idea, that's an American idea. That's what we're fighting for.
Y aquí viene, señores, el momento crítico, porque él subrayó que hay que defender con firmeza el derecho al voto, porque los republicanos saben que sus ideas están fracasando, que la mayoría de los estadounidenses rechazan su visión del país. Y como no pueden ganar limpiamente, pues buscan manipular las reglas del juego. Escuchemos este otro fragmento.
The problem that we've been seeing, not just recently, but this goes back a while, is that the Republicans increasingly recognize their ideas won't.
Ahora bien, quiero que presten mucha atención, les voy a traer una parte más extensa de este discurso, porque lo que dice aquí refleja perfectamente lo que está en juego en este momento histórico para Estados Unidos.
But I am more grateful to you and the rest of the delegation for your sacrifice and what you've done. And it is important for you to understand that highlighting what is happening in Texas has galvanized and mobilized folks across the country. So I think in these kinds of battles, there's a tendency sometimes to be frustrated because the game's a little fixed in Texas. You know, legislative maps have been drawn in ways that entrench one party rather than creating an even playing field. And so sometimes there might have been a temptation to just kind of sit back and let it happen. And I think thanks to the leadership of people like you, the leadership of Leader Wu, all of the members who have taken this stand, we're slowly waking people up to the realities of what's happening right now. And let me just say a little bit about this, and then I'll turn it over to Attorney General Holder. Both he and I believe that the right way to do democracy is not to have the people who are already in office select who's going to vote for them, but have the people of America vote and select who's going to represent them.
That's right, yeah.
And it would be our preference that was done in a non-biased way, that an independent commission or some sort of neutral approach was taken so that Democrats and Republicans compete fairly. The lines aren't drawn to advantage one party or another. and the people decide based on their ideas. The problem that we've been seeing, not just recently, but this goes back a while, is that the Republicans increasingly recognize their ideas won't sell. So we've got to fix the game a little bit. And by drawing maps that splinter Democratic voting blocks, by packing in Democrats into one district so that they don't have influence in other districts, all those things can have an impact of weakening the impact of Democratic votes and strengthening and increasing the influence of Republican voters. And that's not fair. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. The thing that we've also come to recognize, though, and I think Eric, who's been working on this redistricting issue for almost a decade now, has what we all recognize is we can't let a systematic assault on democracy just happen and stand by. And so because of your actions, because of your courage, what you've seen is California responding, other states looking at what they can do to offset this mid-decade gerrymandering that is highly irregular and is not what we should be doing to balance out the maps for this upcoming election. And my hope is that rather than have a race to the bottom where every district is predetermined based on how it's drawn, that over time, the American people, ideally with the help of the courts, realizes that there's a better way. And I think that will happen, but it requires civic education. It requires mobilization. It requires activation of the sort that you have just described and that you guys are representative of. You're setting an example for what all of us have to do. Because, and I'll close with this. I think there's been a tendency, I was born in 1961. And just looking at the room there, that means I might be the oldest person up in here, except for Eric Holder, who's he's really old, even though, he looks good. But when I think about 1961, the Voting Rights Act hadn't yet passed. Civil Rights Act hadn't yet passed. March on Washington happened when I was a baby, a toddler. And so because of the struggles and the fights, and because of the courts recognizing they had a role to play in strengthening rather than weakening democracy, our democracy got systematically stronger during my lifetime, and most of the lifetimes of most of the people who are in that conference room that you guys are sitting in. The problem is, I think there's a tendency to take it for granted. And I think we became a little bit complacent over the years. We assumed that things would continue to get better, that our democracy would become more inclusive, that it would become more fair, that we'd make it easier for people to vote rather than harder for people to vote, that the votes would be counted rather than suppressed. And what we forgot is that history doesn't always move in a straight line, and it's not always 2 steps forward and another 2 steps forward. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and a step back. And we're in a moment right now where not just gerrymandering, but efforts at voter suppression, efforts at questioning the results of elections, efforts at the executive branch unilaterally doing things that bypass Congress and the people's representatives, militarization of cities, politicization of our justice departments and our military. Those are trend lines that remind us that this precious democracy that we've got is not a given. It's not self-executing. It requires us to fight for it. It requires us to stand up for it. And so as tired as y'all may be a little and missing home and ready to, get a change of clothes because, you didn't pack enough and all that, I want all of you to be returning feeling invigorated and know that you have helped to lead what is going to be a long struggle. It's not going to be resolved right away. And it's going to require ultimately the American people understanding the stakes and realizing that we cannot take our freedoms and our democracy for granted. You've helped set the tone for that, and I'm grateful for it.
Y finalmente fue así como Obama cerró su intervención con palabras que retumbaron entre los presentes.
And maybe one last thing I want to point out, because obviously we're talking to Democrats, but the stakes that are involved right now actually impact Republicans as well.
Yeah. Don't know yet.
The Republican Party started as a party that was the party of Lincoln. Illinois Republicanism was about expanding and protecting the Union and democracy and perfecting it. And when I got to Washington, when I was in the state legislature, like all of you, there were differences between Democrats and Republicans, but there was still the capacity to work together. And when I got to the Senate, there were Republicans who I disagreed with on certain issues, but there was an agreement on the rules and decorum and conduct, that there were some things that were bigger than party. And I think there are still a bunch of Republicans out there, voters, as well as some of your colleagues, some people in Washington, who would like to see a return to a sense of fairness and a sense of independence, where a Republican legislature, just like a Democratic legislator, could listen to their district and the people they represent and sometimes break with the White House and sometimes do things based on their conscience and not try to fix the rules or rig the rules in ways that just shove through the agenda of a narrow faction. And when we have fair voting rights and we have fair maps and we're fairly competing, that's good for everybody, not just one side. And that's what we should be aspiring to over the long term, is a situation in which there are rules that are fair for everybody, and then we compete. Just like a basketball game. We started off talking about George Gervin. We wouldn't want to be in a game where if one team gets down, suddenly they get to change the rules.
That's right.
Suddenly their baskets count for 4 points and yours only count for 2. You wouldn't want to be in a basketball game where the other team starts to lose and suddenly they want to fire the ref and put in their own cousin to referee the game. And so the beauty of our democracy, just like any other system we build, is when we protect the integrity of the process. And that's what's at stake here is the integrity of the process. And when you have a process that has integrity, when you have a democracy that has integrity, then sometimes you may lose an issue. Sometimes you may lose a vote. Sometimes the other side wins an election. And they do some things that you don't like, but you know because it's fair, if you can persuade the people next time, then you can take the country in a better direction. That's what we need. That's what this country stands for. That's why it's been the envy of the world. You've got countries all around the world where the elections are fixed, and whoever's in charge suppresses and makes it hard for the opposition to compete. And we used to be a shining example to those countries, and people would aspire to the kind of true democracy that America has. And we need to get back to that, because that's not just a Democratic or a Republican idea. That's an American idea. That's what we're fighting for. All right? I love you.
Potente, señores. Obama tiene esa habilidad de poner en palabras lo que millones sienten, que Trump y sus aliados han puesto en riesgo la esencia de la democracia estadounidense, y que la única manera de poder frenarlo es organizándose y defendiendo el derecho al voto. Pues amigos, estamos viendo tiempos extraordinarios, y ojo que no lo digo solo yo, lo dicen directamente las autoridades de estados como California, cuando pues acaban de anunciar que se preparan para contraatacar con el gerrymandering republicano, impulsado por Donald Trump y sus aliados. Lo que está en juego aquí, amigos, no es simplemente un mapa electoral, es el futuro mismo de la democracia estadounidense. Donald Trump está presionando a ciertos estados, y en especial con el cual empezó todo esto, que es Texas, para poder manipular los distritos electorales a su conveniencia. Obviamente y claramente con la intención de silenciar a millones de votantes y una vez más aferrarse al poder. Ante este abuso, California es uno de los primeros estados en pronunciarse y han decidido dar un paso al frente y van a plantear medidas extraordinarias, nuevas propuestas de mapas que podrían cambiar por completo el equilibrio político, tanto en la Cámara de Representantes como convertirse en un golpe directo contra el trumpismo. Escuchemos.
After leaving the state in protest of the Republican redistricting plan for 2 weeks, Texas Democrats plan to return home Monday, as Governor Greg Abbott has called yet another special session of the state legislature. But the nationwide redistricting fight is far from over. Late last night, California Democrats released proposed maps that would likely flip 5 Republican-held seats, giving Democrats 48 of the state's 52 districts, up from 43. It's a direct counter to Republican gains in Texas. State lawmakers will vote on the plan next week. If 2/3 approve, voters will have the final say in a November 4th special election. And as they return to Austin, Texas Democrats are getting some major backup. Today, the Democratic National Committee is organizing hundreds of Fight the Trump Takeover protests in 43 states to condemn Trump-backed redistricting. And this week, former President Obama added his voice to the fight in a call with Texas Democrats.
When you have a democracy that has integrity, then sometimes you may lose an issue. Sometimes you may lose a vote. But you know because it's fair, if you can persuade the people next time, then you can take the country in a better direction. That's what we need. That's what this country stands for. That's why it's been the envy of the world. That's what we're fighting for. All right? I love y'all.
Thank you.
Safe travels home.
Joining us now, Sarah Satwani, California Redistricting Commissioner. Sarah, thank you very much for coming to the weekend. I want to start the conversation by playing some sound from Texas Governor Greg Abbott and what he had to say, how he characterized what Governor Newsom is doing.
According to Politico, 2/3 of his state disagree with him. It's a joke. He's posturing for the presidency and doing nothing more than that. He's all talk and no action.
Governor Newsom is all talk and no action?
Well, certainly there's action happening here in California. They are moving forward with a ballot proposition to subvert the maps I helped to draw. Maps that are fair, maps that are competitive. Those are things that should be a good thing in a democracy. But unfortunately, that's not the game that's being played at the national level.
How do you justify, Commissioner, asking voters to override the very maps you helped draw? You said you were proud to draw them, but you also have said these are extraordinary times.
These are extraordinary times, and extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. I couldn't be more proud of the maps that we currently have on the books here in California. Our Citizens Redistricting Commission, and I should note, was actually put in place in California by a Republican administration. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was a Republican-led initiative, but now over time, because of its fairness, has gained the support of Democrats far and wide. The commission is 14 members, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents. We passed our maps unanimously. That's something you don't see very often in American politics. We have some of the most competitive districts, but sadly, when we hear the president calling on other states to gerrymander their states, California is left with no option but to fire back.
You mentioned Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger being the one to shepherd the independent commission. He is out against what Governor Newsom is trying to do. Says, I'm getting ready for I'm getting ready for the gerrymandering battle. I'm just impressed he still lifted weights at his tender age. But Sarah, in all seriousness, the thing that I find most interesting about this, and that stands in stark contrast to what is happening in Texas, is even though Governor Newsom and Democrats in California are responding in this way, in the end, the voters in California will decide whether California redraws its maps, right?
That's correct, because within our California Constitution, it's the Independent Redistricting Commission that has the power to draw maps only. So in order to do this legally, the governor would need to have the approval of the voters. That's not going to be an easy process. Anytime we have a special election in California, it's a very difficult process. It's very expensive as well. And they're going to have to do their work to go out and mobilize voters to the polls in order to pass this. There's going to need to be a ton of voter education as well. So this is no small feat, but it will require approval of the California voters in order to do this. And I should note, they have this written pretty precisely. This is a carve out. This does not subvert the independent redistricting process, which will still be in place for 2030.
Commissioner, you talked about the heavy lift that this is going to be. Politico, my old haunt, they have a poll out that found 64% of Californians that were polled support keeping the Independent Redistricting Commission. My friend here likes to note, when we were talking about this earlier today, we want to see those numbers in October. After this voting, after this voter education period takes. What do you think the argument is to those voters who say, we like this Independent Redistricting Commission because it keeps politicians from being able to choose their voters? How do you actually convince people?
Californians are well aware of the threat that the president has made to us directly. Even at the press conference that we had announcing this ballot initiative, nearly 80 ICE agents showed up right outside of the doors. We have seen our neighbors being kidnapped off of the streets. We have seen the executive overreach from the president. We have a real sense here in California and in many places across the nation that democracy is in peril. And that needs to be the message, that at the end of the day, if we do this here in California, it's to serve the greater good of democracy in the United States.
Well, then, Commissioner, what do you say to people like my PBS NewsHour?
Señores, lo que acabamos de escuchar refleja el nivel de desesperación que se vive en el país. Porque por un lado, Donald Trump y sus aliados republicanos quieren manipular las reglas del juego, para que prácticamente el pueblo no tenga voz ni voto real. Por el otro lado vemos a ciertos demócratas, en especial California, que están respondiendo con un movimiento arriesgado, pero necesario, que es modificar sus propios distritos para contrarrestar el golpe. Esto no es un simple debate técnico sobre mapas, hablamos de un pulso de poder, uno que va a definir si la democracia va a seguir existiendo en Estados Unidos o si Trump va a lograr convertirlo en un escenario controlado a su medida. La comisionada de redistritación lo ha dejado claro. Estos son tiempos extraordinarios y requieren medidas extraordinarias. Y tiene toda la razón, porque mientras en Texas, en otras palabras, se está secuestrando el poder del voto, en California se plantea que sea la ciudadanía la que decida en un referéndum si es que se acepta o no los nuevos mapas. O sea, eso es lo que marca la diferencia, ¿no? Porque los republicanos imponen y los demócratas proponen que la gente elija. Claramente no será fácil. Los republicanos ya están gritando que Newsom solo busca protagonismo político. Incluso vimos al actor Arnold Schwarzenegger, que en su momento pues, apoyó la creación de una comisión independiente y se ha pronunciado en contra. Pero la realidad es que este movimiento responde a una amenaza real. El propio Trump ha pedido públicamente a estos estados republicanos que manipulen sus distritos. Todo para asegurarse su poder. Y aquí está lo irónico, porque quienes alguna vez se llenaron la boca hablando de patriotismo y de defender la Constitución son los mismos que están intentando destruir las bases más elementales de una democracia, que es el derecho al voto libre y justo. California, pues bueno, señores, le va a tocar no jugar limpio contra un rival que sabemos que está podrido. Hablamos de chantaje, de abuso. ¿Será arriesgado? Sí. Es polémico, sin duda. Pero la alternativa a eso sería quedarse de brazos cruzados mientras Trump termina de corroer el sistema electoral estadounidense. Pero bueno, amigos, los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, dale like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.